and welcome to the Art of Aging, part of the Abundant Aging podcast series from the Center for Abundant Aging. On this show, we look at what it means to age in America and other places around the world with positive and empowering conversations that challenge, encourage, and inspire all to age with abundance. Today, I'm really pleased to have my friend Sherrill Wayland on the show. Sherrill Wayland is the Senior Director of Special Initiatives and Partnerships at SAGE, the country's largest and oldest organization dedicated to improving the lives of lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender older adults through advocacy and services. At SAGE, Sherrill, with nearly 2 decades in the LGBTQ plus aging space, is dedicated to building strategic relationships that create age-friendly, equitable, and inclusive communities for all. Welcome, Sherrill.
Thank you so much, Beth. It really is a pleasure to be here with you today.
And just a reminder that this podcast series is sponsored by the Center for Abundant Aging. To learn more about the center, including our annual symposium, which happens in October, visit www.abundantaging.org. So, let's be honest. We are recording this at the beginning of March, and it's been quite a year so far. How are you feeling?
You know, Beth, I think that is a question that changes sometimes from moment to moment. Just reflecting on this, I would say sometimes I'm tired, sometimes I'm hopeful, sometimes I'm sad, other times I'm grateful. And, for me, it's just really important to be honest with where I'm at in my feelings and also to find hope and joy every day, because I think that's what keeps me going is finding those moments of hope and joy.
Yeah. Well, you just named several keys to mental and spiritual health. Gratitude, awareness of our feelings, looking for hope, acknowledging joy, and sharing in the struggle. So, we, United Church Homes and others, have been trained to support and engage folks in the LGBTQ plus community with acceptance and love. And some of those things that we've been taught going forward may be riskier than they have in the past. So how do we lean into what the LGBTQ community needs and wants at this point in time?
Yeah, I think that's such an important question, Beth. You know, each community is going to be different. And I think especially today, it may be easy to assume that, I've taken a training on LGBTQ plus aging. I have all the answers. But at the end of the day, it's really important that we're reaching out to our LGBTQ plus older adults, who may be residents in long-term care communities, maybe a neighbor down the street, or a family member, and also our LGBTQ plus employees, and asking them, how can we best support you during this time? We know it's challenging, and we want to be here for you and provide, that sense of community that you may need today, that we all need today. So, I think really taking the time to be in community and conversation with the LGBTQ plus people around us is really important today.
Thank you. That is such an important reminder. I'm speaking from we, folks like United Church Homes, have done the training. We've learned things, we've changed behaviors and cultures, and everything is shifting. And this is a reminder that the learning process is never over. And the fluidity of this time means that we are all figuring this out at the same time. And I'm also aware that different people are going to say different things. I had a conversation recently with someone who's in the LGBTQ plus community who is adamant. We don't need to, we can't back down. We can't become invisible. and then there are others who are so fearful, and it feels a little safer for them to be a little less visible. And so, a reminder that we're all learning together, and there are going to be multiple ways to approach these days. And so I appreciate your drawing attention to having the conversation with those around us.
Well, and I think that's, at Sage, one of our taglines, and we'll probably talk about this throughout the conversation today, is we refuse to be invisible.
Mm-hmm.
As an organization, we refuse to be invisible. However, at an individual level, each person has to decide, what's right for them, where where they feel safest to be out, and where they may not feel safe to be out. But as an organization, we're going to stand for our LGBTQ plus elders and lead the way in this fight, as we continue to fight for equality across our country for LGBTQ plus older adults.
And I'm so grateful to be able to have these conversations ongoing with you and with those at Sage, that we can help support your work. So let's talk a little bit about some of those gestures and symbols. Where where how do we use these in this time?
As you can see, my wall has rainbow colors. For me personally, I think it's really important, again, to not be invisible, and to show up in spaces, virtually, to make sure people know that we are here. We're a part of your communities. We're a part of your conversations. At an organizational level, again, I think it's so important for organizations to really assess where they're at, in their journey for inclusivity and truly being welcoming, and creating that sense of belonging for folks. And oftentimes I see people immediately jump to, wanting to raise a rainbow flag, and say, we're being inclusive because look, we have a rainbow flag. But if it comes down the next day, then are we truly being inclusive and welcoming? I wrote a blog last year, called Pride Beyond the Rainbow Flag, and I would just like to share a couple of comments, or a quote from that blog that I wrote. Each June we see rainbow flags wave from rooftops and flagpoles as a visible sign of support for LGBTQ plus people. Yet as quickly as those flags appear, they disappear, not to be seen for another year. So how do we really live our missions, and really show that we're inclusive of our LGBTQ plus community? And we have to take it beyond the rainbow. We have to examine our policies, our procedures, how we're, in community with people, and, really providing, access to LGBTQ plus elders so that they know, if you, come to our organization for support, we're truly here to support you. And that takes more than just raising a rainbow flag. I don't want to discredit, what these symbols and gestures, can do, but we have to take it beyond simply raising a flag. And and so I think it's really important that we, take that step back and examine, how are we really including people?
So how can we signal that we create a safe space right now when public display of some of the symbols can actually create more insecurity than safety?
This is where it's really important to be in community. Reach out to LGBTQ plus organizations at the local level. Reach out to your LGBTQ plus congregants, residents, employees, and let them know that you truly are an inclusive space, that are offering the supports that they need, and you want to continue to be that partner with them. And I think that's, just so important during these times. Again, it's not so much about raising the rainbow flag as truly being in community and living into our missions.
And I think obviously people are going to react differently based on the life experiences that they've had. So, um, when we're talking about younger individuals who have their lives have been mostly in a place where they know that there are definitely pockets of safety, and now they're not feeling those pockets. They're going to experience things one way, and we have elders who have been through this before, who have had historical trauma because of this, and it's just going to be interesting um, just to be aware of what was the ground people thought they were standing on before, and how are they feeling about the ground that we're all standing on now.
Yeah, and I think this is such an incredible opportunity to build those multi-generational supports,
Yeah,
so that our youth can learn from older generations about navigating, times throughout our histories, which can really be challenging and scary.
yeah,
And know that, we've done some of this work. We've done this work, throughout history. And for those of us that have been in LGBTQ plus advocacy for, a majority of our adult lives, it seems like we're going backward.
yeah, yeah, absolutely.
But we also have so much resilience and lessons that we've learned along the way that will support us as we move forward. And I think that's where we can really, lean into these multi-generational communities.
So, Sherrill, you've been in this work for a couple decades, and how is it that you ended up in this space and in your awareness with LGBTQ elders in particular? And I know that your first connection with United Church Homes was an invitation to do some training. Tell us about the kind of your entry into this work.
So I actually uh, took what I call a professional sabbatical. I had been, largely working in disability rights for the first half of my career. And what I had learned as an advocate, with people with disabilities, I all of a sudden found myself thinking, I need to be doing something for the LGBTQ plus community, for my family, for my friends. It was really a personal and a professional endeavor. And when I started this work, I thought I was going to be supporting youth, LGBTQ plus youth. And one of my friends actually stopped me one day and said, "Well, what about elders? There's nothing happening, in St. Louis at the time for LGBTQ plus older adults. What about us?" And that was really an awakening for me to think, yeah, my friends for years had said, they're 15 to 20 years older than me for the most part.
Mm-hmm.
And they had always turned to me and said, "Well, one day we're all just going to move in with you." I thought, I'm going to need help. I had a pretty large network, and I thought my house isn't big enough. Um, how am I going to best support, my friends and our communities of LGBTQ plus elders? And so that really started me on this journey. I went back to school, received my master's in social work, and for 2 years I really just focused on aging and LGBTQ plus concerns. And so that led me to start a nonprofit. At the time, we had affiliates through SAGE, and I had started a SAGE affiliate here in St. Louis that we operated for 8 years prior to merging with our statewide equality group. But it was during that time that I met with a group of older lesbians at a meeting for Old Lesbians Organizing for Change, or OLOC. And I asked them the question, should you need to move to a long-term care community or a nursing home at some point, what would you do? And there was silence for what seemed like 5 minutes.
Mm.
And finally, one of the older women, spoke up, and she said, "Well, I guess we're just going to have to move to a new city or state that accepts us." That moment, is something that has stayed with me for almost 20 years now. And it really, I think, encouraged me to start this journey of reaching out to long term care communities. It was just unacceptable to me that we would have to think we would have to move from our neighborhoods. We should have access to the same long term care communities, skilled nursing homes, senior centers, that our neighbors have access to. And so it was really my mission to start this work around building relationships with long-term care communities, and that's what led us to find each other,
Yeah.
Sage and United Church Homes. I actually met United Church Homes at a conference here in St. Louis and introduced United Church Homes to Sage National.
Yeah.
And that was where, we started this journey towards working with United Church Homes to be open and affirming to our LGBTQ plus communities.
Yeah. That's been about 13 years ago.
Yeah, yeah. It's been an amazing journey. And I am so grateful to United Church Homes and all that you all do to support our LGBTQ plus communities.
Well, and we are very grateful again to have you walking beside us and helping us with this journey. So there's another interesting connection between United Church Homes and the work that you do, and that's because you and I have conversations along the way, and I pass along to you some of the stories that I hear from our communities. So you want to talk about grandparents?
I would love to. It's actually, I think, some of my favorite work that we've done. Again, because it centers multi-generational relationships, but it
Mm-hmm.
also helps support our older adults in their own journey to be allies, and that's the journey of our grandparents. And I speak to this as a grandchild. I never came out to my grandparents. Now, they assumed, but I never came out to my grandparents. And so many grandparents today know they have LGBTQ plus grandchildren, nieces and nephews, maybe sons and daughters. And they want to better understand, what it means to identify as gay, lesbian, bisexual, and transgender, and how they can best support, their family members. And that's where this call from you, again, just really struck a chord with me, as you all were doing training and really creating policies and practices that were inclusive of LGBTQ plus residents and employees. You had residents coming to you and saying, my grandchild just came out, I have questions. Or my niece or nephew wants to visit, and they're gay, will they be accepted as a visitor here? And so that call from that you and I shared led me to reach out to PFLAG, who is our national, really the leading national organization that supports families in this journey. And so I had a conversation with them, and the next thing we knew, we were developing a toolkit designed, for grandparents and relatives, older relatives, to support the LGBTQ youth and their families. This toolkit, can be used for, independent study if you want to share it with an elder, or it can be used as a discussion guide, to really lead these conversations. We also found through PFLAG that, a number of the early PFLAG parents who were leading support groups in their local communities 20, 30 years ago are now residents in long-term care communities.
Yeah.
So, there's really built-in allyship in many long-term care communities. And when our residents become more inclusive and welcoming of their grandchildren or nieces and nephews, they also become more welcoming of their neighbors who identify as LGBTQ. So I'd love to present on this topic and share, with others who are interested, in how to be an ally as a grandparent.
Yeah. When we held the first in person Horizons of Aging Summit in 2019 in Dayton, a colleague of mine who serves in another UCC related organization in Wisconsin contacted me and she said, "Can we come?" And I'm like, "Yeah." And she came with one of her residents from Wisconsin to Dayton, Ohio. because their residents had started a study group taking a look at this, and the woman who came because their grandchild was transitioning, and they were trans, and she she was shameless in her pursuit to understand. I mean, she went and sat herself down at lunch and sat herself down at dinner next to folks who had, publicly had participated in panels and whatnot that they were trans individuals. And then she was wanting to learn and wanting to make sure that she could be there and love her grandchild. So yeah, yeah,
Yeah. And, I would also share, Beth, this past weekend, I was at the Gateway Open and Affirming Convocation here in St. Louis. And I did the presentation, or really just led a discussion group for grandparents supporting their LGBTQ plus grandchildren. And it was just amazing for me to see, grandparent after grandparent, openly talk about their LGBTQ
yeah,
plus grandchildren and
yeah,
how they want to be supportive. They want to be that soft landing, in a world that oftentimes is full of bumps. And so I think that unconditional love of grandparents is just something that I don't think we can talk enough about.
and this is advocacy work.
Right. Right.
Because when people realize, oh, that law, those statements in public are affecting people that I love,
Right.
that's going to affect how they understand what's happening in the wider culture in a very personal way.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Radical love is resistance, and it helps build resilience. And so I think it's just so important that this work is happening, across the country.
There's a quote I'm going to be writing down and remembering. So, um, as you're having conversations with elder members of the community, what are you hearing specifically from this portion of the population?
Again, I think it's every individual is different, every story is different. We know that many of our elders have been on the front lines of advocacy efforts, not only LGBTQ plus advocacy, but racial justice, immigrant rights, women's rights. They've been there. They've been on the front lines, and many of them are still on the front lines. So, I think again, it's a time of concern, for so many across the country, but we're seeing, many of our elders continue to stand up and be visible in this fight. And they're not going away. They're not going to be erased. And I think that's the biggest, message that we have is, people are standing strong and, leaning into their communities. But at the same time, it's so important that we reach out to our LGBTQ plus elders because of those concerns, because they may wonder,
Yeah,
well, should I need to leave my home? Can I truly find a place today in long-term care where I will be accepted?
right.
And so I think it's important that we continue to reach out.
And I think another role for elders, which is not a natural role, although it can be a very rewarding role, is learning how to be mentors and how to encourage and support those who are coming after us to process what's happening and for them to do the work that they feel that they need to do. So I think that's another layer to the intergenerational
Right.
piece that can be so important.
Yeah, I was just talking with our statewide equality group here in Missouri, their executive director with promo, and we were actually talking about this very topic this past weekend, the opportunity to be mentors. And I think the mentorship can happen both ways, right?
Yep,
It,
absolutely.
it can happen, for an older person. mentoring and supporting a younger person, and a younger person mentoring and supporting an older person. And so having, these conversations can be really impactful, and can just help, continue to build that resilience and sense of community. Um, Sage has a program model called Sage Table, which is actually just a wonderful opportunity to bring people together across the generations to share their stories, to share their strength and their resilience. So I would encourage folks to think about how you can bring generations together.
Now, I know that when Sage Table was first launched, it was kind of targeted towards a specific date. Is that still the same case, or is it now this is a model and you do it when it fits for you?
Yeah, right now it's really the latter. It's a
Okay.
model. We want people to use that model, and whenever the time is right. And there's always something special about sitting at the table and breaking bread together and sharing in conversation and community. Um, Food is a place of comfort, and we oftentimes find those conversations, around the dinner table to be some of the most impactful conversations in our lives.
Yeah. So, what are some of the other programs from Sage that we may not know about?
Yeah, we have a number of programs that are available across the country, and we really encourage folks, to see what you might be able to offer, as far as connecting your community with these programs. One of the first programs that I want to share with you today is a program called Sage Hear Me, and it is an opportunity for folks to be connected with a volunteer, either via text or by a phone call. And for so many of our LGBTQ plus elders, they may wake up every day to a home that they're by themselves, and may not feel that they have somebody to reach out to and to be supported. And so by connecting them with Hear Me, they can text somebody and say good morning, and a volunteer is going to text them back and say good morning, how are you? And those that connection to community is so important during times like this.
Yeah,
Yeah, go ahead.
because I would imagine that again the withdrawing is a risk into further loneliness and isolation, and we know what that epidemic and what that does.
Right.
So yeah, yeah. Okay,
Yeah,
other programs.
yeah. Another program that I think is really important today is a program called Sage Sense. And again, this is available to anyone across the country. It's app based, and it's a financial wellness program.
Mhm.
So folks can join Sage Sense and go through a series of online educational tools that help them think about saving money and reducing debt. And I think during a time when a lot of people are concerned about increasing costs, um, groceries, rent, utilities, anything we can do to save money is really important. So I would encourage folks to check out that program.
And that's SAGECENTS, just in
Right.
case folks hadn't gotten that, because there are
Yeah.
multiple ways to do sense. Um, tell us about the National Resource Center on LGBTQ plus aging. And actually, this is a resource that I found very early on and didn't really know the connection to Sage.
Yeah. So the National Resource Center on LGBTQ plus aging, we are the first and only federally funded resource center dedicated to LGBTQ plus older adults. And we've been in operation since 2010. And on our website, you will find just a plethora of resources that can be used, best practice guides, tip sheets, interviews, really designed to provide education and resources to LGBTQ plus elders and the aging network. And so we encourage folks, to visit our website at lgbtagingcenter.org and, look around and see what's there. Um, Go ahead.
Personal testimony, great resources, and you can order hard copies, and a lot of the stuff's also available for PDF. downloads. So yeah, I have definitely benefited from those resources.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I would say a couple of other programs really designed for the aging provider, Sage Care, our training and credentialing program. Again, before you just go out and raise the rainbow flag, we encourage you to take part in trainings to help your staff and employees, really have a better understanding of how to best support LGBTQ plus older adults. So I think that's another important program.
Yeah. And then the long-term care equality index, I know you've been very instrumental in getting that underway. And the second index will be published here shortly. And that's a partnership that Sage has with HRC.
Right. So the Long-Term Care Quality Index is in partnership with the Human Rights Campaign Foundation, and it's really designed to go that next step. It's one thing to have training, and our next step is then really looking at our policies, procedures, and how we codify LGBTQ plus cultural competency through policies, procedures, and practices within our organizations. And so this is a program that we have over 200 communities across the country who are participating, in the Long-Term Care Quality Index.
And again, our testimony here to participate in this from the initial formation of that to the first indices to the second indices has been really helpful for our organization to continue to take steps. And again, going back where we started from, this process is not ever done, and it's a continual learning process. And it's been helpful for us as an
Right.
organization. Yeah. Well, before we close, come to the final questions for the podcast, please share with folk how they can find more information about you and Sage.
Everything Sage can be found at our website, which is www.sageusa.org. And there you'll find all the programs that we've talked about today, as well as others that we didn't have time to mention. But we would really encourage you to go to our website and just see all the resources that we have. The LGBTQ Aging Center can be found at lgbtagingcenter.org. And the Long-Term Care Equality Index can be found at thelei.org. And so we just encourage you to, reach out to us, see what programs are available. We also provide technical assistance and education. So feel free to reach out.
Okay. So, you ready for our final three questions we
I
ask everybody?
am. Yes.
Okay. Question number one. When you think about how you've aged, what do you think has changed about you or grown with you that you really like about yourself?
My hair. I've always embraced the color of my hair. And, as I age, I see that it's turning a little more tan. I used to be a carrot top, believe it or not. And so I'm really enjoying the new color of my hair. On a serious note, caregiving. I've always had a caregiver's soul, and I truly have embraced that role as I've aged, not only for my family, but my chosen family. And so that's something that I've really, I think, continued to grow into with age.
I know that about you, and I'm glad you identified that. Yeah, yeah. Okay, question number two. What has surprised you most about you as you have aged?
Hmm. That I don't know. I really don't know what surprised me because I think I've always been an older soul. So I'm just really embracing this time in my life.
Okay, and the last one. Is there someone you've met or been in your life that has set a good example for you in aging? Someone that inspires you to age abundantly?
My grandmothers and my mother.
Hmm.
Um, I can't think of better role models than them. How they just continued to be active, to be engaged, to be such strong role models in my life. Um, that's something that I really look back on. And my mother and I are travel buddies, and so she is aging with abundance, and I want to be her. Um, as I continue this journey in life.
And I know you're looking forward to a big trip later this year with her. So
Yes, yes.
yeah, absolutely. I haven't gone back and looked at all of our podcasts, but I think the answer, particularly to this question, helps to provide examples of what has traditionally been called the grandmother effect, or now we call it the grandparent effect, and the role of grandmothers in our lives from generations to generations. So, yeah, thank you. And thank you to our listeners for listening to this episode of The Art of Aging, part of the Abundant Aging podcast series from the Center for Abundant Aging. And we want to hear from you. What's changed about you as you've aged that you love? What has surprised you most? And how do you define abundant aging? And who is your abundant aging hero or influencer? Join us at www.abundantaging.org to share your ideas. And one more time, Sherrill, do you want to give the way folks can be in touch with you?
Yes, reach out to Sage at www.sageusa.org. And you can also send me an email at swayland@sageusa.org.
Great, thanks. Cheryl, it's always great to be in conversation, and we glad we don't record all of our conversations, but always look forward to finding ways that we can connect. And thank you for all that you do and that Sage does. So blessings.
Thank you, Beth. Really appreciate all the work that you all do.